What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Stokastic NFL DFS Monday Night Football live before lock, presented by No House Advantage. My name is Matt Savoca, and we have got an excellent final Monday Night Football slate of the 2022-2023 regular season. Here to break it down with me, of course, is the Showdown Shaman, the man, the myth, the legend, at PlayerQDFS on Twitter, Neil Orfield. What's going on, man? How are you?
As we were talking about a little bit before we got on the show, it's the best ball finals this week. I have nothing left to sweat. Pretty sad to learn that this was the Monday Night Football game. Of course, did not factor that into my build. And I think next year I'm going to make sure I have one Monday Night Football player on every single one of my best ball teams. No, I won't actually, but would be more fun if I did. But that's pretty fun sweat going as we were talking about. Pat Kerrane currently leading for $2 million in Best Ball Mania 3. But a lot of teams that are live. So good luck to anybody competing for an actual milli or two here. But yeah, for this slate, as you said, this is the best slate we've had all year, isn't it? Have we had anything better than this? Does it get any better than this?
Arguably the best game on the slate, just because of the implications with the playoffs, the fact that these two teams are top two or top three in their conference, arguably. The Bengals and the Chiefs and the Bills are the top tier of the AFC. No one's going to argue with that part. Ultimately, this is a great slate. And to all of you out there in a season-long final or a best ball cash league that's finishing this week, whatever's out there, good luck, good luck. It's an exciting time. Of course, there are always those week 18 degenerate leagues, and we'll be here helping you out, of course. But this one is so good, man. Bills and Bengals. This total has moved a little bit, moved up kind of unsurprisingly with the hype on both offenses. I kind of thought as the day went on, you would see it go from 49.5 to 50.5. And the Bills are now 2.5-point favorites. Let's just start there with the implied totals for each team. Right now, it's Bills 26.5, Bengals 24. Does that feel about right to you, even though the Bengals are at home?
Yeah, I'm a little bit surprised by that, to be honest. With it being in Cincinnati, I would have expected the Bengals to be favored here. Obviously, the Bills are great, but the terrible Minnesota Vikings came in and beat them in Buffalo, so the Bengals should be able to beat them at home. I would think. I'm surprised to see, honestly, that the Bills are favored by 2.5 here, but it's probably right. I mean, Vegas is better at doing this than I am, so yeah, it's exactly right.
Wait, are we saying that? Are we talking about this Vikings game that had one of the craziest bounces and bad beats I can ever remember? Is an anecdotal reason that this total is wrong? Neil, million maker with Neil. No, I know you're joking.
I'm just saying this team is beat. It's a great. Actually, I think the Bills are maybe one of the favorites to get to the Super Bowl, I'm sure, along with the Eagles, Chiefs. I don't know who else is up there. Yeah, they're a great team. I'm just surprised to see them favored on the road in Cincinnati, because the Bengals also a great team.
Absolutely, and they've been on a tear of late. I was looking at their recent games. Guys, the Bengals have not lost a game since week 9, since before their bye week. They have lost exactly one game since week 6. They have lost 2 whole games since week 3 of the regular season. That's pretty good football. They have a plus 85 point differential, and yet they're starting at home as 2.5-point underdogs here. You get why. Not only does Josh Allen sport a top 3 pass offense, if you look at Football Outsiders pass DVOA, the defense for the Bengals is the worst of the 2 defensive units as well. One thing I will say, though, Neil, I was looking at the stats today. The Bengals are moving much closer to league average, maybe even above average in the secondary in a lot of these defensive stats. They are no scrubs at all. That's one argument you could make, a devil's advocate argument for the shootout potential that I'm sure some people want in the fantasy and DFS world.
I mean, we've got a 50 implied total, something right around there. So higher, over 50. We've got a 51.25 implied total, I guess. No, 51 implied total. So yeah, we're expecting a bit of a shootout, right? That's what Vegas is expecting. Seems like the likeliest outcome, but I mean, honestly, this is the kind of game that I could see it going either way. I mean, I don't see it going to like a 30-point game or something like that, but I could see it going a touchdown under, a touchdown over, both pretty easily.
I think a plus or minus 7 differential is a pretty reasonable thing. One thing that it's nice to see is that there are absolutely no weather concerns. It's going to be 57 degrees today in Cincinnati with 4-mile-per-hour winds. Didn't expect that in early January, but Here we are. We got a couple super chats to hit right off the bat. Corey Williams was asking, I think it's a two-part question. So he's asking P. Ryan or Cook just straight up today.
James Cook. I mean, if you're just looking like raw projection, I think it's got to be Cook. I should double check this. Yeah, I mean, Cook projected for 2 more fantasy points than P. Ryan, and the difference in projected ownership is not that great. I wouldn't be surprised to see the gap actually wider than what we're projecting. P. Ryan for about 12% ownership, Cook at 17%. At those ownership levels, I'd probably prefer Cook. I wouldn't be surprised to see Cook get a little bit more ownership than we're anticipating, though, just because he's a rookie. People like him. He's pretty good running back, and he's been taking on more of the workload lately. So I kind of think he'll be a little bit higher owned than we're anticipating, but I'm still probably going to go Cook. I think he's got the clearest path to a big score.
And then he kind of splits up it into another part of his question. If you wanted to pick 2 of the 3, so really just rank these 3 for DK large field GPPs, Hayden Hurst, Tyler Bass, or the Bills defense.
Ooh, that's an interesting trio. Let me look at what the tools say. So just looking at the projections, we've got Hurst at 21% ownership, 8 projection, Tyler Bass at an nearly 9 projection, 18% ownership. I'm probably going to go Bass here. I think relative to his projection, relative to ownership, looks the best. It's close. I mean, that's a really tough question. Do you see it? It's really close for me. It's hard for me to really differentiate between those plays, but I think I'm going to go Bass of those 3.
Okay. Well, if I'm going to rank them, I'm going to go Bass, Hurst, Bills defense.
Okay. Yeah, I think that sounds right to me.
Okay, cool. And then we got one more super chat here. But before we do, guys, just want to say that super chats are not the only way to get our attention, because when you have these new membership banners, you can also ask a question as well. You see many people in the chat right now with those very neat looking Stokastic logos next to their names. That's if you're a subscriber here on the channel, a member here on the channel. But even if you don't want to do that, you don't want to get all the fancy custom emotes, because that's not in the cards right now, just hit the like button. Make sure you hit the subscribe to the channel button, but hit the like button. Helps us out a lot. As my buddy Lofty says, atone for your sins. Make sure we can look our families in the face when we leave this show. We got 125 likes already, but with 1,000 people watching, we just crossed the 1K barrier, Neil.
Wow.
I think, I don't know. I don't know about you, but I think we could get to something like 300, 400 likes today if we really push things. We push ourselves, apply ourselves.
This is our last Monday Night Football show of the season. Please do hit that like button. Show appreciation for all the content that we do. I've been working I've been told, I've seen on Twitter, you shouldn't talk about how much you work as a fantasy analyst, because like this job is so easy. It's not real work. So maybe I'll stop myself there. Stop myself from talking about how much I've been working all day. But regardless of that, please hit the like button, because we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it really does matter. It does help us out. It is a nice way of saying thank you. No skin off your back. Hey, and Jay Murphy, we see a welcome to Team Stokastic banner right there. Love to see it. Keep it Leafy Landscape Services, $5 super chat. No running back in the lineup. Viable option today, Neil? I immediately say yes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a viable option. I think most of my lineups will not have running backs in them. Both these passing games are just so good. You don't really need. I'm not saying you should full fade the running backs if you're doing like 150 lineups, but probably wouldn't have a running back in my first lineup or 2.
That it's why are we dealing with such a hard slate where we have to decide between Stephon Diggs, Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Gabe Davis, Tyler Boyd, Hayden Hurst. Yeah, I mean Mixon and Singletary and Cook are fine plays. We'll get to them in a minute, but obviously we have just a metric crapload of talent at the receiver and tight end position today. So no RB is absolutely fine. All right. Just a few more game script questions before we dig into the player by player analysis that we always do. Nothing really big in the inactives and actives world that I saw. Did you see anything come across the wire that really interests you? I mean, safety Jordan Poyer is going to play. That's better for the Bills, but still doesn't stop the shootout potential of this one.
Yeah, nothing all that eventful. Tommy Sweeney's out, but he's been out. We were projecting him to play anyway. I think Chris Evans is out, which I think, again, we were expecting. Yeah, so no real news there.
Yeah, well, that's a good way to have it. Chris Evans, the running back, is out. Sam Hubbard as well for the Bengals. That's really all I'm seeing. Honestly, the last question we got, you know it's coming. This is a ever increasing total at 51 now. 58 points is not impossible when you have Josh Allen on the field and of course Joe Burrow. But look, that's a whole lot of points. I ask you this every single week. I'll ask you again. What are the shootout potential? What are the shootout chances here? The percentage chances that this one goes 7 points over the total or more.
Honestly, with the total being as high as it is, I guess 7 points is like a lower percentage of the total, so it seems like it probably is likelier actually than usual. So I'm going to go with 28% chance.
All right, yeah, very definitive 28% chance. I'm going to put it at a 20% chance because I think a lot of the shootout potential is baked in to the implied total. Obviously, as you said right up top, the variance is still plus or minus a touchdown. But I think a lot of that potential, the offensive firepower, is expected in this one more than more than some other games. Dare I say, Broncos games.
Yeah.
I think it's time to go player by player. You ready to dig in, man?
Yeah, let's do it.
I said that to dig in, man. I don't know. I said that, it felt strange off the tongue. I digress. Nathan Perkins with a $5 super chat. McPherson and Singletary or Cook and Knox?
Probably that's really tough. These are really tough questions. Let me
stop
we
you
can
right
do
there.
two on the player compare tool.
That's exactly.
Yeah,
oh, look at you, company man, thinking the same way, my friend. Because you can use the player compare tool. And, what if you want access to not just the player compare tool that we have at Stokastic.com, but all of the tools in our NFL suite, our NFL package? Well, if you sign up for BetMGM and you make any bet, $10 bet or more over there, when you click the link in the video description below, that's exactly what can happen for 2 months of free access to not just the NFL tools, but every single sports tools we have. That's the ownership projections, the projections tool, the boom bust tool that we're always referencing here on this show, and of course the lineup generator tool that they keep pouring more and more work into, and the player compare tool we're talking about tonight. So we can give you our opinions, absolutely, and sometimes we do sway individually from the projections. But what's our foundation, Neil? No doubt about it. It's the tools here at Stokastic. The best way to get into the action right now is that 2 free months by clicking the link in the video description below and getting into the action at BetMGM, where, by the way, you can also add on a risk-free bet up to $1,000. You could just do 10 if you want to just do the Stokastic side of things. But BetMGM also has a $1,000 up to $1,000 risk-free bet. So you can bet some of the biggest underdogs to start things off, and you'll get that back in your account as credit. And then you'll also get the 2 free months of Stokastic Plus Platinum when the bet settles. So don't go doing big futures bets or Super Bowl bets until we get there. Get something that settles this week, today, more likely, and then after it settles, you'll get that email so you can start off at Stokastic Plus Platinum. Just an awesome way to get into the action. And let's do the same for this Buffalo Bills team. Look, Josh Allen is playable. So it's not about are you playing Josh Allen? It's how much are you playing Josh Allen? In what ways are you playing Josh Allen? Do you prefer him in the captain spot or do you prefer him at the flex? Is there a FanDuel versus DraftKings discrepancy? Talk to me about the overall strategy you have with Allen tonight.
Yeah, my overall strategy is to play a lot of Josh Allen. He's going to be in the vast majority of my lineups. He projects extremely well. You just look at our tool. He actually looks like he's coming in a little bit under-owned. Neutral in the captain's spot, 14% projected ownership, 13% chance to be an optimal. I mean, that's a little bit of negative leverage. I don't really care that much about that little leverage. In the util, 56% projected ownership, 62% chance to be an optimal. So positive leverage in the utility spot. Yeah, I mean, we've got him optimal in 75% of lineups. I've got him in even more than 75% of my lineups because we do have positive leverage here as well. what can you say? He's one of the best passers in the game, one of the best running quarterbacks in the game. Josh Allen is a great play. The only real ding against him is the ownership, I guess, and then also the price tag. He is the most expensive player on the slate, but that's not going to stop me from playing a whole lot of Josh Allen. On FanDuel, doesn't really change all that much. We've got him. He doesn't look quite as good as far as optimal odds. We've got him in the optimal lineup 68% of the time total. 20% of the time in the captain spot, 48% of the time in the util. Looks like he's a little over-owned in the captain spot, little under-owned in the util spot. So in both cases, we've got positive leverage in the util. So I guess if I had to choose one, I'd prefer to have him in the utility if I'm making one lineup, both on FanDuel and on DraftKings. But you can play him anywhere, and you can play him anywhere without any pass catchers. Like he's got so much rushing upside that you don't necessarily need to have a pass catcher in your lineup, even if he's in the captain spot. He's the rare quarterback who I allow to be in my captain spot without any pass catchers. I still prefer to have at least one pass catcher, and generally you're going to get one anyway because these pass catchers project really well. But he's at least viable to play in the captain spot. So yeah, generally I guess I could say you can play him without any pass catchers. Usually I want to have a pass catcher paired with him because he's also a great throwing quarterback.
I kind of think playing him naked, as in without any receivers, would be almost a contrarian play because it feels like the way that he gets to his ceiling performance, he almost definitely drags somebody with him in the receiving game. One thing I was looking at, though, he's averaging a little bit less in terms of passing yardage per game than you might think. It's up around 268, 269 yards per game. And he varies a lot. Like if you look at just his last 7 games, and then you compare it to, that 268 average, I think he's been below it all but 2 games. But those 2 games that he was above it, he was over that number by about 45 yards or more. So it just shows you the ceiling potential as both a passer and a rusher. On that note, in terms of all players projected for double digits or more, Josh Allen is a top 6 value play in terms of expected fantasy points per dollar. So even just points per dollar, I think he's a really good play. So of course you can play him at the captain. If you have the guts to go some skill player there, though, it does look more interesting according to our tools. Got a couple of super chats pouring in. Sam Pierce asking, he's fading Chase and Diggs and using Higgins and Knox instead. Is this viable? He's just looking at hot hands and Diggs especially, but Chase as well with no touchdowns.
Yeah, I mean, looking at high hands, like I wouldn't go box score chasing, but like if you're making one lineup, certainly that's viable. You can make a great lineup without either of Chase or Diggs. If obviously if it's Higgins who's scoring the touchdowns, that's totally fine. So is it a viable lineup? Yes. I wouldn't do it just because they haven't hit recently. Typically that's more of a reason for me to want to play them, just because they're going to go lower owned because they haven't done as well recently. But certainly I do think that it's viable to fade both Diggs and Chase. And then he said he's going to play Knox, and who do you say he's going to play?
Yeah, so he's still capturing a good amount. He's still attaching himself to both offenses.
Absolutely, yeah, it's viable. Yeah.
And then, this is great because John Badger asks right away, sort of the opposite side. Large field DK GPP. I have Chase at captain with Burrow and Allen in the lineup. Am I spending too much salary on studs to make a competitive GPP lineup, like being unique? Now, I think I know what you're going to say, but I'll cede the floor to you.
Yeah, I'm going to say no. You're not. I mean, that's totally viable, and there are ways to save salary on this slate. You got Khalil Shakir, you've got Hayden Hurst. Obviously, kickers defense is always viable, so absolutely that's a viable strategy starting place for your lineup.
I got it wrong. I thought one way you would say to get all those players in is to make sure that you're not spending the full amount.
That is true.
Of your salary cap. That would just be one way to be unique when you have studs like that at the top of your lineups.
That is a very good point. If you're going to have those 3 highly owned players in your lineup, and then you throw Hayden Hurst in there, he's probably going to be highly owned. So I think there are ways to get there, but you do need to make sure we're trying to be kind of unique, not necessarily 100% unique, but we're trying to make lineups that are not duplicated hundreds of times. And so I would be careful about spending your entire salary if you start with those guys.
Well said. Obviously, Allen, full fading Allen is do that at your own risk. It's not something that we're really going to recommend when he's in 3 out of every 4 simulated lineups in some way or another across both primary platforms right now. We move to the running back position, which is much tougher for the Buffalo Bills. Devin Singletary is still going to be a factor, but James Cook continues to look better, continues to get more work. And we obviously have the salary discount to be concerned about. And now there's been a switch, actually, right? No, I'm wrong. We still got Singletary higher up there, but it's getting closer and closer. What do you make of this Bills running back situation today?
Yeah, I mean, I think that both Bills running backs are viable. Devin Singletary projects better, and he's more expensive. The Bengals are 14th in terms of run DVOA, so it's not the best matchup in the world, not the worst matchup in the world either. Kind of a tough matchup, but not that terrible. James Cook has taken on a bigger role recently. Over the past 6 weeks, he's been averaging about 8 carries and 3 targets per game, which, it's not a ton, but it's more than he had been earlier in the year. He seems to be playing a bigger and bigger role, but I still think Devin Singletary is the first guy out there for the Bills. He's probably going to get more run, I would think. Do you see it any different? Based on how I'm reading the data, it looks like Devin Singletary is still there, RB1. James Cook has just taken on a larger share of that. Now he's the pretty clear RB2. Do you see it any differently?
No, that's still kind of how I see it. Look, it's very close now over the last 6 weeks in expected fantasy points, which if you hadn't heard my spiel at this point, it's pretty late in the season for it, but it's just the targets, air yards, receivings, where and when you got them on the field, kind of added up, put on a scale we understand, fantasy points. At this point, it's 11 expected fantasy points per game for Devin Singletary over the last 6 weeks. James Cook sitting there at 9. Now, what's more interesting to me is that James Cook has now passed all the other tertiary options on this offense. Dawson Knox, Isaiah McKenzie, Nyheim Hines, but he's still behind Singletary and Diggs. Diggs is at 14 expected fantasy points as a comparison to Singletary. I think all we're really saying here is both players are viable. I just still think that there is that James Cook absolute ceiling game where I feel like it's a little less viable with Devin Singletary. Not out of the question, just a little less viable.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. He seems to be, the more dynamic back. I will say, I think you and we were talking before the show about listening to a little bit of Liam's best ball stream, and I thought it was interesting. He said in the stream that he thinks in games that the Bills need to win, they're going to go to James Cook more, which is not the impression that I've had, but he's been taking on a bigger role as maybe they need to win games. So maybe there's something to it. Liam, of course, as you know, is a huge Bills fan. And that's his take on it. I don't see necessarily that in the data, but it's worth noting maybe in the game that they need to win, maybe James Cook does take on a little bit bigger of a role, and certainly just being the rookie who's been coming on. Oftentimes, we've talked about this on several Showdown slates. Oftentimes, rookies do take on a bigger role throughout the year, and we've seen that with James Cook. Could continue to take on an even bigger role. So certainly, I get your point that maybe James Cook has a little bit of the higher ceiling, at least points per dollar relative to Singletary.
I also see it that right now Singletary is still the number one if you just look at pure snaps, routes run, but there appears to be a real ceiling for Singletary that wasn't there at the beginning of the season. That indicates to me that no matter what, unless something catastrophic like multiple turnovers happens, Cook isn't going away, and that means Singletary isn't getting to that 60% route run rate that we saw earlier in the season. He hasn't hit that number since week 8. Still, if you're looking for an add-on to this Bills offense, I still don't think these are crazy options. You can definitely add them with Josh Allen as well. It's just tough because there's 2 of them. Anything else to add? Are you playing Nyheim Hines, or you're ready to move on to the wide receiver?
Nyheim Hines, a little bit of a thin play. I think in the largest field GPP, if you're playing 150 lineups, I'd sprinkle him in there. He's probably not somebody who's making it into my first 10 or so lineups. He just hasn't really been on the field. I really thought he was going to come to Buffalo and take on a bigger role. Like I thought as the weeks went on, they'd work him in more and more. He has run 9 total routes over the past 3 games and had 2 carries, just not really involved. So really his paths to getting there. I mean, any game, every game is different, right? So he could get there, he could be involved just unexpectedly in the middle of the game, but more likely from what we've seen, it seems more like he's going to need an injury or garbage time to really get involved. And of course, we know Nyheim Hines can also, if he just has a few plays, he can break one of those off. So it is possible for him to get there on just a few routes run, but he's not out there all that often. So probably not in my first 10 lineups, but in a 150 set, I would definitely want to have like 5% Nyheim Hines. He'd probably be over the field.
That makes all the sense in the world to me. And now we got to move on to these wide receivers because, I mean, fading Stephon Diggs feels pretty tough today in terms of optimal lineup chances. The only person that's ahead of him, as you would expect, Josh Allen, but he's well ahead of Gabe Davis, Dawson Knox in total lineup percentage right now. And his total leverage score, if you include both the captain and the flex spot, is slightly positively leveraged. We don't have to tell you he's a good play today. What are you doing with Stephon Diggs? How much are you going to play him? Are you near the field, above or below?
Yeah, I mean, I like Stephon Diggs quite a bit as well. I looking like I'm near the field. We've got him projected for 11% captain ownership, 10% chance of being optimal, slight negative leverage. Again, that's close enough to neutral. I don't really care all that much. Pretty neutral in the util as well. 39% projected ownership, 40% chance to be an optimal. We know who Diggs is. He is the alpha on this Bills team. The fact that he has not been getting it done recently doesn't really matter to me. I think he's still pretty clearly the number one option for Josh Allen. I don't like what do we really need to say about Stephon Diggs? He's out there running routes on he actually doesn't run as many routes as like Gabe Davis does, but he takes more breaks, but he's still used like when he's out there, he's targeted more frequently. So yeah, Stephon Diggs pretty clearly the alpha receiver for the Bills. I don't think anything has changed there. I'm going to be close to the field, and he's in like half of my lineups.
Yeah, and well said, because even though his snap share route rate is a little bit different than Gabriel Davis, his weighted opportunity, his share of team targets and share of team air yards is still pretty significantly higher than Davis. If you look over the last 6 weeks, Davis is at about 19% of the offense. Stephon Diggs still up there at 22, 23% of the offense. One thing that kind of intrigued me, though, is that when you look at that same stat, weighted opportunity, Isaiah McKenzie is creeping up there as well. He's got 14.5% of the team's weighted opportunity. I definitely think he's viable. Let's talk about some of these secondary options. Davis, McKenzie, and then we'll throw in the super chat from Safedin, who says thoughts on Shakir. He's obviously much further below that. Start with your thoughts on Davis and McKenzie here.
Yeah, I mean, Gabe Davis, pretty clearly the wide receiver 2 for the Bills. He's had kind of a disappointing year, but on any given slate, we know that Gabe Davis can break off for 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. Certainly the case in this game as well. I like him quite a bit. He is a boom or bust option. We never really know when the boom is going to come, but we have him a little bit under owned in this game, both in the captain spot and in the util. Projected for 6% captain ownership, 7.5% chance of being optimal. So positive leverage there. In the util, 27% ownership, 30.5% chance of being optimal. So he looks great. He's looking like he's a little bit under owned. The price is right. I like Gabe Davis quite a bit. Isaiah McKenzie and Khalil Shakir. I noted this in my article today, and I don't really know what to make of it. I'm curious if you have a take on this. In the last game against the Bears, it was a bad weather game. Khalil Shakir actually played more snaps and ran more routes than Isaiah McKenzie. I think it was just a weird situation because of the weather. Maybe Khalil Shakir was a little bit more useful, but I don't know. Do you think Khalil Shakir is going to continue to see more snaps, or do you think that was a fluky situation because of the weather?
I think with just this one sample, this one pop, it's really hard to know whether this was variance, especially given the weather and the specific game circumstances. But I think we should really keep an eye on it. And I'm glad we talked about it, because honestly, if he has a 37% or more route rate again, you're probably going to expect more than one target and 5 air yards. He caught that one target last time, but that just kind of indicates that there's a possibility that he's moving up there. I don't know if that's the truth. I still think Isaiah McKenzie as a gadget player is really intriguing, and his horizontal speed is very helpful. Khalil Shakir can play, though. This 5th round pick this year out of Boise State. I think he's fine. I mean, let me see what he's getting in terms of the amount of the offense. Compared weighted opportunity for Shakir, McKenzie's up at 14.5% over the last 6 weeks. Shakir is at 3%, lower than James Cook, Hines, Dawson Knox, of course. So it's a low probability play, but it's possible. Any other wide receivers you got your eyes on? Cole Beasley called up, I believe. Anything else at the bottom of the barrel? Any Neils nobodies you're looking at the wideout position other than the ones we mentioned?
Yeah, I think Khalil Shakir. So I don't want to undersell my interest in Khalil Shakir. I am playing a
Okay.
lot of Khalil Shakir just because. So it's very much an ownership dependent thing. Like if we had him projected for 25% ownership because of that last game where he played a lot, like if everybody was going to be playing him, then I would be like, it's probably a fluke. I'm just going to play a ton of Isaiah McKenzie. We're not projecting it that way, though. We're expecting Isaiah McKenzie to get a lot more 19% ownership to Khalil Shakir's 5% on DraftKings. And that's meaningful to me, just that difference in ownership. If Khalil Shakir is going to get around 5% ownership, I have a lot of interest in him just for the possibility that he has taken on a bigger role. And honestly, like, I don't see any reason that Isaiah McKenzie wouldn't be useful in a bad weather game. So I don't see a reason that the weather would have made Khalil Shakir, the guy who plays more snaps. So I think there might be something to it. I'm not confident. I think that the likelier outcome is that Isaiah McKenzie plays the wide receiver 3 role and Khalil Shakir plays a few snaps. I think that is the likelier outcome.
Hmm.
But with Khalil Shakir getting 5% projected ownership, given the possibility that they're going to continue to try to use him more, I think I have interest there. He's a player that I'm going to be actually playing a lot of. So I'd say Khalil Shakir probably the top of the list as far as Neil's nobodies go. We also don't have many great options that are just going under own. Like, Trenton Irwin, I'd much rather play Khalil Shakir at 800 than Trenton Irwin at 4,400. I'd rather play him even if they were the same price. And then outside of that, it's like Quentin Morris. Like it's kind of thin as far as guys who are not getting much ownership. So Khalil
Yeah.
Shakir is somebody that I'm kind of planting my flag with, and I think there's a good chance that he's not going to be out there for more than like 8 snaps, or maybe not even 8 snaps. So not a high confidence play, but I think that he has a lot of upside just with the possibility that he does see similar to the amount of snaps he saw last week. So I do like Shakir quite a bit. I don't think I'm going to be going to Cole Beasley at all. He played like 1 snap in the most recent game for the Bills. I don't think he's somebody that they're planning on using a ton. Of course, you never know. He's been part of the team for forever. Maybe they do want to see him break out at some point, but I'm not planning on playing him here. What do you think of Cole Beasley? Do you think is he somebody you'd want to play in a 150 set?
Maybe like a sprinkle here or there. Like if you're in that situation we were talking about in the super chat where you're just loading up with studs, yeah, throw Cole Beasley in there, because what if those studs go off for absolutely insane ceiling performances and the only way to pack them all in was to basically take a zero? And if you get one target, and let alone one in the end zone, that may help you out. It should be worth noting, though, that in terms of leverage scores, chances of being in the optimal lineup versus the expected ownership, Isaiah McKenzie is looking pretty spicy in our tools. And so I do think that is something worth noting. And in expected fantasy points per dollar, that opportunity value metric I'm looking at, Naheem Hines as an off the wall play, an alternative to Shakir, I don't think the craziest idea. Let's move to the tight end position where Dawson Knox is definitely viable. What are you doing with him? We got him projected sort of in the muck here, just over 8.5 fantasy points, but less than players like James Cook and Devin Singletary. Like all tight ends, it seems it comes down to what's his ability to score a touchdown.
Yeah, I was really surprised looking through his box scores. Dawson Knox has 20 targets over the past 3 games. He has been more involved out there for the Bills. It was pretty disappointing for most of the year. We kind of all thought, he signed this big contract. He's going to come in and he's going to tear it up for the Bills. He had a great season last year where he was seeming to score a touchdown like every other game. I think he had a 3 touchdown game last year. He hasn't really shown he hasn't had that many spike weeks this year, but he definitely has that ability. He's definitely a tight end who can score a touchdown. And if he's going to see, 7 targets in this game, yeah, sign me up for some Dawson Knox at 4,800. The ownership not getting too crazy with Knox. We've got him at 21% util ownership with a 23% chance of being optimal, 4% captain ownership with a 5% chance of being optimal. So looks good. We've got positive leverage on Dawson Knox in both spots. What do you think? You want to play any Knox here?
I'm definitely down to play Knox. He's sort of in our mid-range in terms of optimal lineup percentages, but when you see that positive leverage score, it means I want to be with or above the field. I still think he's a little bit more touchdown dependent than I want, but looks pretty good. He's over that 1.5 expected fantasy points per dollar threshold that I really like to see for these viable mid-tier options. We got to hit some super chats. I realized I moved on to the tight end position when we had a bunch of wide receiver related questions. I want to hit those before we move too far away. Corey Williams asked, when should you not play another wide receiver when you're captaining a wide receiver? Do you have any rules against that?
I don't have any rules against it. I think that it's something you could do. Like you could set a rule that says if I have Stephon Diggs or a Bills receiver in the captain spot, no more than one other Bills receiver in your lineup. It starts to have, I think you start to see some negative correlation when you have, two more wide receivers or pass catchers from the same team along with a player in the captain spot, just because, every one of their catches takes away from that captain's catches. And you obviously need the captain to have a big game. But I think that you could play, two other pass catching options in the lineup along with captain, receiver, or tight end is viable. I probably wouldn't want more than that. Generally, I prefer to have, if I've got a wide receiver or tight end in the captain spot, I prefer to have no more than one more in the lineup. But I think two more is certainly viable, especially on a slate like this where we have many good options, and it's also somewhat salary dependent, right? Like guys like Shakir, if he's one of those receivers, he's so cheap. He might need 8 fantasy points, so it might be 1 touchdown catch is all that he gets, and that's enough. It's a little bit tougher if you're going to play, T. Higgins at captain, then also have Jamar Chase and Tyler Boyd in the lineup. That's with the salary involved, it gets a little bit tougher. So it's a little bit dependent on salary and stuff. But in general, if I have a tight end or wide receiver in the captain spot, I prefer not to have more than one other tight end or wide receiver from that team in your lineup generally.
Yeah. So if you're making a hard rule, like in an optimizer or something, maybe you would put no more than 2, but usually 1 makes sense.
Yep.
Thanks for breaking that down. My filler arc has a few questions here. First one, Knox or Boyd? So he just wants to compare Knox to a player like Tyler Boyd. And so I think this is a good time to do it. We'll get into where Boyd fills in compared to the other Bengals receivers in a minute. But what do you think of comparing Knox versus Tyler Boyd today?
Yeah, I mean, so just looking at the single game tool, Boyd is more likely to be optimal than Knox, both in the captain spot and in the utility spot, and also has positive leverage. They both have a good amount of positive leverage. I think I'm inclined to go in a vacuum. I would say Boyd. It really depends on the rest of your lineup, though, too. Like, are you playing? Which quarterback are you playing? How many receivers do you have from that team? There's a lot of factors that go into it. It's close enough that it would come down to the rest of the lineup. I don't have a really strong take between the two, but I think Boyd in a vacuum. We've got him optimal 6.6% of the time in the captain spot, 4.4% ownership, optimal in the utility spot, 25% of the time at 22% ownership. So we've got positive leverage on both. It's a little bit more on Boyd, so I think that would be my preference. What do you think, Matt?
I think that's the case. He also adds with another super chat. Thank you very much, my filler arc. Alan is the captain for the lineup at question, so he did give you some context there. So I just wanted to make sure you read that and added that on to that context because
So that would probably make me lean towards Knox a little. Like that would be enough for me to it's close enough between those two that with Allen a captain, unless you already have like 3 Bills receivers elsewhere in the lineup, then maybe not. But if you only have like one other Bills receiver in there, it'd probably be Knox would be my preference there.
Makes sense. And I see some people asking, what do I mean by in a vacuum? That means when you take out the per dollar aspect, when they get on the field, how much are they going to produce? So and also without the context of the lineup that my filler arc actually just gave us, right? Because it really does matter who else is in your lineup and what contest you're in to truly answer these questions correctly. And remember, guys, that's the whole point of the player compare tool, is to show you guys the range of outcomes so that you guys can do that contextualization for yourself. That's why it's an awesome tool. And we got so much more for you coming down the pike too. It's just awesome stuff along with the rest of the Stokastic Plus tools you can get. And to answer your other question as well, it sounds like I would prefer Hines just a little bit, and you would prefer Shakira, as he says. But we're talking about a player in Shakira's 5.5% expected ownership, and Hines is 4%. Very similar in salary as well. So,
I also prefer Shakira, not just Shakira. I also prefer Shakira.
Yeah. Of all the hips that aren't lying on this slate, it's definitely Shakira that I prefer as well. That is 100% true. We dash back to the tight end position. Dawson Knox, we mentioned. We also have Quinton Morris available to us for 200, and we've got his projection up over almost 1.5 points. We got to consider it.
So I actually mentioned him in my article about low-owned players you could consider. Both the 3 I mentioned are Khalil Shakir, Quinton Morris, and Nyheim Hines. So I like Nyheim Hines a bit too. I think as you said, I prefer Shakir to either of these guys just because I think there's a higher likelihood that he's going to be on the field more. But Quinton Morris did play 37%. So actually, maybe Quentin Morris is the one who's the likeliest to be on the field more. He played 37% of snaps for the Bills in Week 16 and ran routes on 26% of passing plays. He's playable. He's 200, certainly playable. Those are the three really low owned options that I am strongly considering here, and they're relatively weak. Like there are some games where we see guys that are running routes on like every passing play and they're still somehow getting 5 or 6% ownership. We don't have that here. We have relatively weak low owned options, but I like Quentin Morris quite a bit as well. Quite a bit is maybe strong. I like Quentin Morris for a large field GPP in a handful of lineups. How do you feel about Morris?
I think we got you. Like we're still talking about a player in Morris who, look, he's in the optimal lineup very infrequently. 97.5% of the times when we run our sims, he's not in the optimal lineup. But when you need a $200 play and you just need one catch and it could fall in the end zone, he's still attached to a Josh Allen offense. Like that's as good as we can say for a $200 player. We don't have any clear value options at this point in the salary tier, but hey, it could absolutely be worse. We got to move on here to the Bengals, though, as we hit almost the top of the hour. Anything else to add about any of these Bengals options? I was just laughing as you were talking because someone is answering, what do you mean by in a vacuum? They were like, in a dust chamber, you know, the thing that cleans your house? Like, what about the player inside the vacuum? It's just stupid. Any final words about the Buffalo Bills here?
About the tight ends? No, it's Dawson Knox, it's Quentin Morris, nobody else not playing. Tommy Sweeney's out. I don't even know who else. Zach Davids? No, just those two.
Yeah, that's pretty much a wrap on the Bills. They've got serious ceiling potential, though. Got to talk about No House Advantage, guys, where the first match deposit bonus has recently moved from $50 up to $100 when you sign up using the link in the video description below. No House Advantage has some awesome ways to play, two very distinct ways to play. The Pick'em contest, where you rank the stat projections over or under that you want based on a player's. And so based on those confidence scores, you get a specific score based on those picks. It's really cool, and you can win huge prizes. They also have the new Versus the House mode, where you can get up to 20x your entry fee. They've got multiple sports, NBA, MLB when it comes back, PGA, NASCAR, MMA, you name it. And again, up to $100 as a first match deposit bonus. The other thing over there is they've got huge overlay, Neil. And this is something we've been saying. On the other platforms, you just won't see overlay like this. And NHA understands these numbers as well. They're doing it for you. They're giving it as a gift to try to help you out as you begin your journey over there. I think that's a huge part that people need to realize. And it's a great part of this deal, you know?
Yeah, intentional overlay is something I can get behind. I wish all the sites would do intentional overlay. We got to take advantage of this no house advantage deal while you can. And anytime you can find free overlay, that's something. It's the best deal in the business.
And it looks good over there. It's a nice looking platform as well. They're doing great stuff over there. Get into the action today. The Bengals, man, they're on a tear and not getting the danger fields today. They're not getting a whole lot of respect, but ultimately I think this team could put up huge numbers, and it's all on the back of one Mr. Joe Burrow. I mean, this guy's awesome, and he's got great weapons. How are you dealing with Joe Burrow when you've got a player in Josh Allen who has that fantasy Konami code in rushing? Burrow could absolutely outpass him today.
Yeah, Josh Allen has that great rushing, but Joe Burrow has that it factor. You got to remember the it factor here. I got a mosquito or something in here. It's been a while. Joe Burrow, I like Joe Burrow quite a bit. Looks like he is a little bit under-owned in the tools, in the utility spot in particular. 11% capped ownership, 11% chance of being optimal. In the util, he is 49% projected ownership, 53% chance of being optimal. Yeah, I like Joe Burrow quite a bit. Love his receiving options. You know who you're going to in general. With you got the big three receivers and Hayden Hurst. He doesn't have the rushing upside that Josh Allen is. So as far when you're correlating, I'm not factoring in that it factor. I am still playing Joe Burrow with at least one pass catcher, and preferably two when I've got him in the captain spot. I'm not forcing it. I'm not forcing two just because he has actually shown a little bit of, I think he has 5 rushing touchdowns already this year, like 250 yards. So a little bit more rushing upside than he has shown in the past. I like Joe Burrow quite a bit. On FanDuel, I actually think that he might be viable to play naked in the flex. I still did force in a pass catcher. Actually, on DraftKings, he really is too in the flex, just because you don't need quite that same upside, and he does have some rushing upside, but still, I prefer to always pair him with at least one pass catcher because he doesn't really have that kind of rushing upside like Josh Allen.
So you're saying if your models don't include Moxie or Mojo, whatever you want to call it, and obviously grit, which is very quantifiable, you just really don't have a model at all. You don't have a projection at all. That's kind of what you're saying. You got to hope that the stochastic projections are taking in those kind of considerations. And if anybody is, we know it's the stochastic team.
Yeah, I know.
No,
I've talked to Alex about it. I know he factors in that it factor.
yeah, the it factor is important, and it's very numeric, and so that's the very tip top of our process. But you mentioned it. Joe Burrow's actually had a little bit more rushing touchdown upside than I thought. He's at 3.2 fantasy points over expected per game over the last 6 weeks, which means he's been efficient on a whole lot of expected fantasy points, 21 to be exact. That would do it. And ultimately, I think Joe Burrow in the flex, in lineups that don't necessarily have his top two options, are really interesting to me because, if you're playing like a Bills heavy lineup and you don't necessarily want to have to play the guessing game of who of the big two wide receivers has that ceiling performance you need, why don't you fade them both and then save that salary so you can get to, a bigger stack, a higher upside stack on the other side. Yeah, you can add one receiver to it. We got plenty of options here, but Burrow's a great play. He's in the optimal lineup nearly 2/3 of the time right now when we run our sims. Anything else to add about Joe Cool here?
No, I think we've covered it pretty well. He's a great play. You know who you want to play with him, and we talked about the correlation. Yeah, I think we covered it well
All
enough.
right. Joe Mixon, though, still up there in salary, man. Like it's not even that far below T. Higgins, but he doesn't necessarily play all the passing downs or the goal line downs. We just know that he has massive ceiling potential and plays on a great team. What are we doing with Joe Mixon?
Yeah, Joe Mixon, definitely an interesting play. He projects fairly well. It's not a great spot against this Bills defense, one of the better rush defenses out there. They are ranked third in terms of run DVOA. So it's a tough spot for Joe Mixon. I was surprised. I was looking through his game logs. He's been targeted 15 times in the past 2 games, if I'm remembering correctly. He's just been very involved in the passing game. Obviously, he runs quite a bit. I like Joe Mixon. I'm going to have him in some lineups. We've got him actually looking a little bit over, actually way over owned. That's surprising to see in the captain spot, projected for 7.5% ownership, 3.6% chance of being optimal. So probably wouldn't play him in the captain spot. In the util, we've got him fairly neutral, 32% ownership, 31% chance of being optimal. We know who Joe Mixon is. He's the RB1. He has been showing some PPR upside the past couple weeks, which is nice. Yeah, I like Joe Mixon just fine.
Yeah, look, the 9 targets and after a 6-target game in week 15, yeah, the 15 targets in 2 weeks is good, but the 35% route rate is the exact same route rate as Samaje Perine last week.
Yeah.
And look, Perine had 4 targets as well. I'm just saying there's a whole lot of variance, and sort of like what we were saying with Devin Singletary and James Cook, it's almost like both of these players put a true opportunity ceiling cap on the other. And so it kind of makes me lean towards the lower salary player. Of course, Mixon could have a ceiling game here, but in our tools, in our simulations, he's not showing up as much as the field wants to play him.
Yeah,
and that leads us in. Just to add to that, Corey Williams asks another question here, $4.99 super chat. Thank you, Corey. Mixon seems to be the one I can't fade, and I'm finding him as my favorite captain. So obviously, different strokes for different folks. What wide receiver tight end has the best edge, regardless of ownership or field size, with the context of he really likes Mixon as a possible captain tonight?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
What wide receiver or tight end gives him the best edge, considering that he really likes Mixon at the captain? So he wants to kind of play some positive correlation plays off of a big ceiling game from Mixon.
Yeah, I guess if you're playing Mixon of the captain, I'd probably go to a Bills receiver then. I'd be more inclined to. I mean, you can put T. Higgins or Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd in that lineup, but there's going to be some negative correlation when you've got a Bengals player in the captain spot who's not the quarterback, there's going to be a little bit of negative correlation with the pass catchers there. Not something that I like group out in my lineups, but if I were hand building and you're choosing, a next spot, I'd probably go to a Stephon Diggs or maybe Gabe Davis as next into that lineup. But certainly you can play all those guys. There's no like huge correlation between Joe Mixon and any of these pass catchers. I would say there's slight negative correlation with pass catchers on his own team, so I'd be a little bit more inclined to go to the Bills, but I don't feel all that strongly about it. Do you see it differently, Matt?
I think, look, if it were a home favorite team that was favored by, say, 2 touchdowns, a very different game script than we expect here, then we would say that both the running back for that team and the tight end were highly viable options. In that regard, I would say maybe a player like Hayden Hurst makes some sense, where like maybe the Bengals control start to finish in a way that most people do not expect whatsoever. And so most people aren't going to play lineups that way. So you captain Mixon, in this timeline, he dominates. And then also there's some sort of touchdown from a Hayden Hurst player as well. Looking at some of these correlations, there isn't any major correlations for Joe Mixon. And the positive correlations actually, surprisingly, are with Hurst and Higgins over the last few seasons. So a smaller sample size, but pretty decent positive correlations with Hurst and Higgins over the last few years when Mixon has a big game. Let's move on here to Samaje Perine, who's obviously viable as well. What are you doing with Perine, who's projected for just under 7 fantasy points and is at 4,600, a viable mid-tier option?
Yeah, I think that's a good description of Perine. Seems like he kind of earned himself a bigger role when Mixon was out for a few games. Perine, obviously was playing the workhorse role for a couple games there. And then since Mixon has come back, the past 3 games, Samaje Perine has had 15 carries and he's seen 10 targets. So pretty involved over the past few games. He's only 4,600. He's going to get a little bit of ownership as a result. We're projecting him for 12% ownership in the util. But I think, certainly Samaje Perine is somebody that I have some interest in. We're projecting him for, so he actually looks a little bit over-owned in both the util and the captain spot. 1.7% projected captain ownership, 0.8% chance of being optimal, 12% util ownership, 7% chance. So negative leverage there, but he's playable. He's probably not somebody who's making it into my first 10 lineups, but again, another one of those guys in a 150 set. Samaje Perine will make the cut. He'll be in some lineups.
Yeah, in terms of expected fantasy points per dollar, I just have to say he's off the charts in terms of opportunity value per dollar. Now, this is using a 6-week sample size, which has Mixon and the variance that he's had within that. So that might be swaying that number.
Mixon was out for a few of those games.
It only includes games that they played. So these are all per game stats, then brought over to the per dollar stats. But you're absolutely right. And you could say also that Mixon was being mixed back in to the fold to the point where now he can't really say that expected value number is real for Perine. But it's enough where I think I want to be with the field, even though our tools are kind of saying it's a so-so play. You ready to move on to the wide receiver position here?
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's do it, because look, there is some serious talent. And of course, I'm talking about the one, the only Trenton Irwin, who leads the NFL among all players with 20 or more targets in touchdowns per total opportunity. I mean, this guy is the next Calvin Johnson. Trenton Irwin with nearly a 20% touchdown rate per No, of course. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, they're the show, man. What do we do with Chase and Higgins? Is there a certain way you like to play him? Is there one that you particularly like more? Chase is obviously more in salary, but he still has the higher ceiling, just straight up.
Yeah, I think Chase is probably the wide receiver one there. T. Higgins, I actually think T. Higgins is pretty close behind him, but we have Chase actually has a little bit of positive leverage in the util. T. Higgins has negative leverage both in the util and in the captain spot. So in a vacuum, I'd prefer Chase getting similar ownership and actually seeing positive leverage, but kind of splitting hairs. These are both clearly like if you can have 2 alpha receivers on the same team, I think these guys are those, Chase and Higgins. About as good as it gets. We have Chase projected for 11% captain ownership, 9% chance of being optimal, so a little bit of negative leverage there. Positive leverage in the util, 39% ownership with a 40% chance of being optimal for Chase. Higgins, we actually have negative leverage in both spots. 7% captain ownership, 5% chance of being optimal. 30% util ownership, 29% chance of being optimal. Both are certainly playable. If you play like me and you're leaving salary on the table, you'll probably end up with more Higgins just because it's easier to fit him in. But I can't really say I feel that strongly about it. I'm just telling you what the tools say. We've got a little bit of negative leverage on Higgins. Maybe go to Chase first. How do you feel about these guys?
So one thing that I don't think people realize is that Jamar Chase's target numbers are starting to look like some of the best in the league, like Cooper Kupp level. Here are his game logs, just pure targets: 12, 10, 11, 8, 15, 13, 11. If you look at weighted opportunity, which includes share of team targets, share of team air yards, he's at 25.6% of the team's total offense in the passing game over the last 6 weeks. Higgins is up there at 20% too. No one else is even at 11%. These two players absolutely dominate their team's overall opportunities. And with wide receiver being a pretty variant position, in a 1 week sample, we could easily see T. Higgins go off. But if you're asking me who I want more, there's no question I want to find the salary to get up to Jamar Chase. Yeah. I don't think he sees full shadow coverage from Trey White. I think it takes more than one defender to cover Jamar Chase in the NFL. You just have to provide help over the top for most of the game. Maybe I'm wrong there, but that's just pure football. I think it takes a village to stop Jamar Chase, and maybe you still can't do it.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, Chase, man, I did not realize how many targets he has been getting recently. That is definitely promising. Probably explains why he looks better in the tools, and would definitely sway me a little bit more toward Chase as well.
And then we get to some pretty interesting options down below them. Tyler Boyd, still pretty involved. Yeah, about 10% of the team's weighted opportunity, just below Hayden Hurst in the games that Hurst plays, of course. What are you doing with Tyler Boyd? And are you actually getting to any Trenton Irwin or any players below Boyd in the Bengals wide receiver pool?
Yeah, so I was actually just looking at Trenton Irwin because somebody asked about him in chat, and I was like, I did not realize how much he has been playing. I feel like I missed an opportunity there. I should have written about Trenton Irwin in my article. I missed that he actually played a ton of snaps in the most recent game for the Bengals. He played 45% of snaps in the most recent game for the Bengals. Am I missing something there? Is he taking on a bigger role of this offense? Because we had Tyler Boyd just playing 51% of snaps in that game. Do you think there's anything to that? Do you think Trenton Irwin has like earned himself a bigger role here? I haven't thought about him all day until I looked this up, and I'm like, man, he was targeted 4 times in the most recent game. He ran 24 routes. I probably should have more interest in Irwin than I have had. I did not even include him in my sleepers that you could play, and I think that he certainly deserves to be involved there, unless I did miss something. Do you know of any reason?
I think there was a Boyd injury, or he missed some time. Okay. But I also saw, and I'm sorry to my buddy who sent me an article that basically was like a beat writer talking about the rise of Trenton Irwin within the offense and how he's, they're building more stuff out for him, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, you mentioned it. He's now hit a 44% route rate in 2 of the last 3 games. But the one where he hit 94 was definitely the Boyd injury game. Okay. And then look, he's scoring touchdowns. The thing I like to see, and we were talking about this last year, I believe it was New Orleans Saints player Juwan Johnson, who's always targeted in the red zone. These low target players on good offenses who consistently get red zone looks often turn into their next decent players. Not saying they're going to be the next Higgins or Chase. I'm not crazy here. But this is how you get opportunities to score, and then he's capitalized on it. He's got 3 touchdowns in the last 3 games. His touchdown rate will go down. I was actually looking at this research. Players who have had an 11% touchdown rate or higher with 20 opportunities or more go down the next season by an average of 7% in touchdown rate. But maybe the magic continues here. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, I think that was a really good recap. And you were right. Tyler Boyd was actually injured in the game in the last time he had a finger injury and left the game. And then Hayden Hurst also being out, as EMAC points out, and other people in chat have also pointed out. That was probably the reason for Trenton Irwin being getting a little bit more opportunities, but still worth a mention because, as you say, if he's that involved in the red zone, that's certainly a good indicator. So I still think probably not as good of a play as he would be if this 45% snap share was going to continue, which I don't think it will with Tyler Boyd back this week, but maybe he does get some opportunities in the red zone, and that makes him playable in a large field GPP. So yeah, I think Trenton Irwin probably somebody you can consider. I don't think I'm going to go and force him into any lineups just now, but definitely playable as a low owned options. I'd add him to those other three that I had listed as low owned options you can consider.
Then we move to the tight end position, where we've mentioned plenty about Hayden Hurst already. He's really the only player worth considering because Mitchell Wilcox has a 1.6 fantasy point projection, but he's up there at nearly 2K versus some of these other players who've got that, similar up floor and ceiling to Wilcox, I'll say, but are lower in salary. So tell us what you're doing with Hurst, and then any interest in Wilcox or any other Bengals receivers or tight ends for that matter.
Yeah, I don't think I'm playing any other tight ends from the Bengals. I don't think I'm playing any. We talked about Boyd, Higgins, Chase. Yeah, so Hurst, definitely somebody that I have interest in. He's $3,000. He clearly is not as expensive as he should be for his role in this offense. As I noted in my article today, he's played 11 full games this year. He's seen at least 7 targets 5 different times in 11 games. He's pretty involved in this offense, and we know that he's a pretty good receiving tight end, and he's just 3,000. So he's too cheap relative to his involvement in this offense. He can still bust. So like it's kind of an ownership play for him. If he was going to be 50% owned because of that price tag, I would probably fade him. But we're not seeing that. We're projecting Hurst for 21% ownership in the util with a 28% chance of being optimal, 4.5% captain ownership with a 7% chance of being optimal. He looks great. I really like Hurst here if people are really not going to get there because he's clearly too cheap for his involvement in this offense. How do you feel about Hurst?
Well said. In that opportunity value metric I've been mentioning, expected fantasy points per dollar, Hayden Hurst up there with the very best in the skill players. Now, obviously, pure projections, we've got other star players ahead of him, but even just with a medium projection that's creeping towards double digits, every tight end is touchdown dependent, unless your name is like Travis Kelce or this incarnation of George Kittle, who's just a monster with Brock Purdy, apparently. Hayden Hurst is really as good as it gets for a 3K tight end option when you're just looking at pure ceiling. Obviously, the leverage score looks good in the tools. I will say we're still talking about a team in the Bills who are the 3rd best defense in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the tight end position. As you said, he could bust. Have we covered the Cincinnati Bengals skill position players or anything else you want to add from the wide receiver or tight end position or running back for that matter as we close this team out?
Nope. I think that we have covered every player who I would consider playing. Looks like we have 2.5% projected ownership on Trent Taylor. I don't think I'm going there. We have a projection of 0 for him. Yeah, I think we've covered all of the Bengals receiving options we're talking about.
Nice. And we are almost at that 350 mark. We check in towards the end of the broadcast. First of all, thank you to the 1,400 people watching right now. If you didn't hear it before, it does help us, hitting that like button. You guys know what to do. Neil, sometimes I know you get a little worried that they don't know what to do, but I think they know what to do. But we'll see what the next few moments have. I think we might be able to get up to a 400, maybe even a 450 number if we ask politely. But, what do you think the skill level of the team is right now in chat?
We've got a pretty skillful chat. I think that we have some really high level listeners. I think that at least 25% of them can hit that like button. We've already hit that number, right? We've got 1,400, you say? So we've already got over 25%. I would guess that there are a few new people who have not hit that like button yet. So I think we can get to 400. I think it's reasonable.
I think it's reasonable. And no, we are not locked. I've got the game starting at 8:30.
Yeah.
In my book. So, we got some bonus time here. That's why we got to talk some kickers and defense, guys. Look, we say this every single time. Kicker, defense, viable, especially on offenses that can actually play. So let's actually start with the kickers because McPherson and and Bass, they both look pretty solid. Do you have any preferences, pluses and minuses? Where are you versus the field on these two kickers?
I think Bass is my favorite. I mean, the Bills are favored in the game. Typically, you prefer the kicker on the favorite. Of course, football is weird. So, like, you always think, oh, you want to play the kicker from the favorite. But then weird things happen where, like, oh, they turn the ball over at the 30-yard line, at their own 30-yard line, and then the other team can't move the ball. And then the kicker gets a field goal. And things happen all the time where and of course, these are both, this isn't a great example because they're both great offenses. So, not making the point that I was starting out to making. Yeah, Tyler Bass is my favorite. He looks great. He projects better. Projects better point per dollar. He's probably my preferred kicker here, regardless of whether he is on the favorite team here. But Evan McPherson looks great too. Actually coming in, both have positive leverage. We've got in the captain spot, Bass with 1.7% projected ownership, 3.4% chance to be an optimal. Evan McPherson, 1.6% projected ownership, 3.3% chance to be an optimal. Positive leverage on both in the captain spot. And then in the util, also, we've got Bass at 18%, McPherson at 18%, Bass with a 20% chance to be an optimal, McPherson 19%. Both look like great options. It's hard to predict game to game which kicker is going to be better, but typically, at least often, they come in a little bit under-owned. I like both these kickers quite a bit.
Would you be willing to play kicker in the captain position? And then if so, what does a lineup look like if you're playing Bass or McPherson, who, as you said, their median projections up there with like solid secondary receiving options, up there with some of the top running backs we have? Do they really have the ceiling to get you to the top of the leaderboard in that captain spot?
They do. And that's what we see in our simulations. We've got Bass in the optimal lineup 3.4% of the time, McPherson 3.3% of the time. And the reason is the price tag. It's not because these guys are going to go out and score 30 fantasy points. It's because you can throw Tyler Bass in there at the captain spot. He's 4,200, so it would be 6,300 in the captain spot. That's a really cheap captain. That allows you to go out and play T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, throw in, a number of guys who are going to project really well here. So it's because it's not that they, have that upside to score 30 fantasy points. It's that they allow you to play all of the other players who have the upside to score 30 fantasy points in the same lineup. So that's the reason that these guys are optimal as frequently as they are. Of course, if you're like me and you like leaving salary on the table, you're shooting for uniqueness, I would guess that they're optimal a little bit less when you're leaving salary on the table, but still certainly plausible. I mean, you can still leave salary on the table and play guys with upside like a Hayden Hurst, like a Tyler Boyd. So I still think that it is viable to play these kickers in the captain spot. I would be hesitant to use the full salary cap just because I think most people who use a kicker at captain are going to play the full salary cap. It's more likely to win also, but it's going to be over-owned. So I'd rather leave a little salary on the table.
And last question, because we have the time today. It's nice to have this this leisurely stroll through the kickers and defense. We're usually literally talking as fast as we could at this point in the broadcast because we do like to spend time on the skill position players. It's where people are sorting things out. But would you play two kickers? And if you are playing a kicker at the captain spot, would you avoid the two kicker option if the answer is yes?
No, I think it's totally viable to play two kickers, and then again, you can fit in more studs if you play two kickers. And although there are, I like Khalil Shakir, we talked about Nyheim Hines. There's a really good chance that none of these low-owned options that are cheaper than them hit here. I mean, we have Hayden Hurst and Isaiah McKenzie down there as well. So those guys, it's a little bit likelier that they hit than the Khalil Shakir type options. But I think just the median projection for these kickers is higher than any of those guys anyway. So yeah, definitely viable to play two kickers in your lineup, and even if one of them is at captain, I've got no issue with it. Do you want to talk about cash games at all? People were talking about cash games, and it's certainly not my expertise. I don't play cash games, but I've seen a number of people in chat talking about cash games. What do you think? Do we have anything else to cover first?
Yeah, I think honestly we can point people to our fantastic tools because you can look at the optimal lineup percentage and use our fantasy cruncher tool as well, and then you can just create that optimal lineup as well. That will help us in cash games. We know that lineup is going to be duplicated. We did get a $2 super chat from Freddie, no question. Just thanks for the $2 super chat. We appreciate it. But I realize we have 4 minutes left and we still got to talk about defense. And I really like this at the end of the show, Neil, because it forces us, when we talk about the ceiling and the upside of all of these players, These are the two squads that could absolutely ruin their time. And look, the Bills, I've been saying for weeks that the Bills are not that same elite defense that they used to be. Well, now they're third in rush DVOA and seventh in pass DVOA, according to Football Outsiders. They're back, baby. And look, as much as we like this Bengals team, I do think the Buffalo Bills defense does have some viable ceiling potential as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these quarterbacks throw the ball a lot. Joe Burrow, as a result, has thrown 12 interceptions this year. Josh Allen has thrown 13 interceptions this year. Certainly, you can rack up some sacks here. There are ways for these defenses to score fantasy points, and people don't really want to play these kinds of defenses in an obviously a high-scoring game. But a really easy way to get different is to play the defense against the quarterback. So play the Bengals defense against Josh Allen, or obviously the Bills defense against Joe Burrow. That's an easy way to get different in a large field GPP, especially on a slate like this where we are expecting fireworks. Yeah, I think these defenses definitely viable, and we have positive leverage looking at the Bills. 3% captain ownership, 3.5% optimal, 17.5 util ownership, 20% optimal. Positive leverage in both spots for the Bills. Similar for the Bengals, not quite as positive. 2%, I guess, basically neutral in the captain spot. 2% ownership, 2% optimal. 14% util ownership, 14% optimal. So we've got neutral ownership on the neutral leverage on the Bengals, but I think both are definitely viable here. Weird things happen. We say it all the time on these showdowns. Like yeah. Weird things happen in football. People go in, they think they know what's going to happen. Oh no, there's going to be no turnovers. These teams are too good. These offenses are too good. These are good defenses, and mistakes are made in the NFL. So definitely viable.
Yeah, if you want to get weird, you want to get contrarian, Bengals don't look as good in the tools, but they're still in the optimal lineup nearly a fifth of the time. Any final thoughts for the people? And we'll leave you with one final super chat. Who is your favorite minimum price punt play? Probably on that Bills side. So leave the people with that and some final thoughts for the game. And if you got a score, how about that, Neil?
All right. Minimum price punt play. Quentin Morris, I see immediately. I think he's really the only viable option at 200. Do you see it? Do you see anybody else you'd play there?
Yeah. And if you bump it to 800 or 1200, you can include players like Khalil Shakir or Naheem Hines. Those are probably the players on my list. What's your score prediction for today, man?
I would actually guess that it goes under if I had to guess. So I'm going to go with, let me what is the total? I'm going to go with Bills 20. Oh man, actually maybe not. I'm going to go Bills 24, Bengals 21.
We get a shootout. 37-36.
Ooh, that'd be fun.
Or 38-37. Bills win by 1 in what begins another epic rivalry, just like Chiefs-Bills. These are going to be good teams for a long, long time. Let's win some money, guys. Thank you so much to Neil Orfield. Follow him at PlayerQDFS, the man, the myth, the legend, the showdown shaman himself. Thank you, as always, to Tyler Zander behind the virtual glass. My name's Matt Savoca. You can follow me at Draftaholic as well. Guys, this wraps Monday Night Football for the regular season. Might have some fun during the playoffs, but it's been an amazing year. Let's close it out with a great one. For Neil, for Tyler, I'm Matt. Let's win some money. See you guys soon.